I need you to stay with me for a few minutes before you decide what this song means. Because if you leave too early, you'll misunderstand why I made it. And maybe that's what scares me most. Not rejection, not distance. Not even the possibility that you may never become my wife. What terrifies me is the idea that you might hear my voice one day when it's already too late, when you already chose silence over us. When your heart finally became tired of waiting for a man who always felt one sentence away from saying what he truly meant. Do you know how dangerous it is for someone like me to make a song like this? People think men who build companies, who chase impossible things, who spend their entire lives trying to control the future, are fearless. But love doesn't care how intelligent you are. Love humiliates intelligent men. Because suddenly you can calculate billion-dollar risks, but you cannot predict one woman's heartbeat, and you became the one thing I could never fully control. That's why this isn't really a song. It's evidence. Proof that somewhere inside all this ambition, all this discipline, all this noise, there is still a man terrified of losing one woman he hasn't even held long enough yet. I keep imagining you hearing this late at night. Maybe your room is quiet. Maybe you're pretending not to care. Maybe you're telling yourself, if he truly loved me, why did it take him this long to speak? And honestly, you would have every right to ask that. Because I almost stayed silent forever, not because I didn't love you enough, but because I loved you enough to understand what happens when love enters a man's life at the wrong time. It rearranges him, destroys old priorities, exposes wounds he spent years hiding behind productivity. Do you know what's embarrassing? I can stand in front of thousands of people and speak without fear, but the idea of being emotionally seen by one woman, that nearly destroyed me, especially you, because you don't feel temporary. And that's the problem. Temporary love is easy. Temporary love doesn't ask for sacrifice. Temporary love doesn't wake you up at 3 a.m., wondering whether you're becoming the kind of man she can safely grow old beside. But you feel permanent, and permanent things force a man to confront himself. That's why I kept hesitating, not because my feelings were weak, because they were too real. Hey, have you ever met someone who made you suddenly aware of every flaw you carry? Not because they judged you, but because for the first time, you wanted to deserve someone. That's what happened to me. And I know you probably think this song is a proposal, but it's more complicated than that. A proposal is usually confidence. This is fear wrapped inside hope, because I don't know where you are emotionally anymore. I don't know if you still wait for me in the quiet moments. I don't know if another man has already learned how to speak to you gently while I was still fighting wars inside my own mind. And that thought, God, that thought has been eating me alive, because what if I waited too long? What if the future I kept building accidentally created a future without you inside it? Would you hate me for that? Or worse, would you slowly forget me? I think people underestimate how painful almost love can become, especially when both people feel something powerful, but timing behaves like an enemy. You know what the cruelest part is? I could feel you pulling away emotionally before you ever said a word. Women don't disappear suddenly. They disappear quietly first. The delayed replies, the softer reactions, the emotional caution, the way hope slowly stops sounding hopeful. And I noticed all of it. I just acted like I didn't, because admitting I was losing you would have forced me to admit something even harder, that I was the reason, not because I didn't care, but because I kept believing I had more time. That's the lie ambitious men tell themselves. We'll love properly later. Later when work slows down. Later when life becomes stable. Later when the pressure eases. But later is dangerous, because sometimes the woman you love learns how to survive without you, while you're still planning the perfect moment to finally speak. And maybe that's why I'm speaking now. Not elegantly, not perfectly, but honestly, because I can feel something changing between us, even now, even through this song. I can feel you deciding whether I'm emotionally safe enough to trust. And I don't blame you. You've probably been strong for so long already. Strong women always pretend they need less love than they actually do. But I wonder something. When was the last time someone truly fought for your heart instead of simply admiring it? When was the last time someone spoke to your fears instead of your beauty? When was the last time someone made you feel chosen, not convenient? Because I need you to understand something carefully. You are not a pause in my life. You are not emotional entertainment. You are not some temporary comfort while I chase bigger dreams. You became part of the dream itself. And that realization scared me more than failure ever did. Maybe that sounds dramatic. But love after a certain age becomes terrifying precisely because it's no longer fantasy. It becomes consequence, history, attachment, risk. You stop asking, do I feel chemistry? And start asking, can this person hold my heart without eventually dropping it? I think about that constantly with you, because you don't need another charming man. You need emotional safety, consistency, softness, truth. And I'm terrified that while trying to become extraordinary in the world, I may have accidentally failed at becoming simple enough to love properly. That's the hidden conflict I've been carrying, not whether I love you. Whether I know how to love you without hurting you. And no, AB still haven't told you the real reason yet. There's something deeper underneath all this hesitation. Something I've been hiding even from myself. But before I tell you that, I need to ask you something honestly. If a man truly loved you, but feared becoming the reason your heart breaks someday, would you still want him to stay? And if you could hear the fear in his silence, would you forgive how long it took him to finally speak? If this song is finding you tonight, subscribe quietly so I know somehow this confession reached you. And tell me where in the world you're listening from. Because maybe distance is the only thing standing between two people who were never supposed to miss each other this much. Sometimes I wonder if you can feel when I'm thinking about you. Not in some poetic way, I mean physically, like something shifts inside your chest for no reason. And suddenly you feel sad without understanding why. Because that's what happens to me. I'll be in the middle of work, surrounded by noise, people talking, screens glowing, entire conversations happening around me, and then your absence enters the room, and everything loses sound. Do you know what's strange? I used to believe loneliness came from being alone, but that isn't true. Real loneliness happens when you finally meet the person you could spend your life with, and still feel them slipping through your hands. That's a different kind of pain, a quieter one, a mature one, the kind that doesn't scream. It just slowly changes the way you breathe. I think that's why this song became dangerous for me to make, because every word forces me closer to something I've spent years avoiding. The truth, not the romantic truth. The uncomfortable one. The one men like me hide behind achievement because it's easier to look successful than emotionally exposed. You probably think my hesitation came from fear of commitment, but commitment was never the problem. I would commit to you in a heartbeat. Forever doesn't scare me. Being emotionally responsible for someone I deeply love, that terrifies me, because once you truly love someone, your mistakes stop hurting only you. And I know what kind of damage emotionally unavailable men leave behind. Women carry it for years, sometimes decades. A careless sentence from the wrong man can echo inside a woman long after he disappears. I never wanted to become that memory in your life. That's why I kept stopping myself every time I got close to fully opening my heart to you. Because loving you stopped feeling casual very quickly. It started feeling irreversible. And irreversible things force a man to confront the parts of himself he hoped nobody would ever touch. You touched them anyway, without trying, without manipulation, without games. That's what made you different. You didn't chase me emotionally. You saw me, and being seen by the right woman is terrifying, because suddenly all the armor becomes heavy, all the pretending becomes exhausting, all the carefully constructed versions of yourself start collapsing. Do you know what I hated most? You could hear sadness in my voice, even when I was pretending to be okay. Nobody does that. Most people hear words. You heard emotional weight. And once I realized that, I knew this could become dangerous, because a woman who understands your silence can become impossible to replace. That's why I pulled away sometimes. Not because my feelings disappeared, because they became too intense to hide safely anymore. There were nights I almost called you. Nights I replayed old conversations just to hear the way your voice softened when you spoke to me. Nights I stared at my phone, wondering if one honest message could change everything between us forever. But then, another thought always arrived. What if she finally sees who you really are? Not the version people admire. The exhausted version, the emotionally conflicted version, the man who still doesn't fully know how to receive love without preparing for loss at the same time. You know something I've never admitted before? Part of me kept waiting for you to leave, even when you stayed, even when you cared, even when your heart was clearly trying to reach mine. I kept expecting disappointment, because people who spend years emotionally protecting themselves eventually stop trusting beautiful things. And maybe that's the real reason I delayed this proposal, not uncertainty about you. Uncertainty about whether someone like me deserves a woman like you. I told you there was something deeper underneath all this hesitation. Here it is. I've spent most of my life believing love was temporary, conditional, fragile. Something people promise during beautiful moments, then abandon during difficult ones. So, when you arrived and loved me calmly, patiently, without trying to control me, my mind didn't know what to do with it. Healthy love felt unfamiliar, and unfamiliar things scare people, especially people who learned to survive emotionally before they learned to trust emotionally. Do you understand now? This song isn't simply asking you to marry me someday. It's asking whether you can love a man still learning how not to fear being loved deeply. That's much more vulnerable. And honestly, much more frightening. Because if you reject ambition, a man recovers. If you reject ego, a man adapts. But if you reject his fully exposed heart, something inside him changes permanently. That's why this matters so much to me. Because you are hearing a version of me almost nobody sees. The version underneath the confidence, underneath the intelligence, underneath the future everyone expects me to build. And sometimes I wonder, if you truly saw how emotionally afraid I am, would you still choose me, or would you decide I'm too complicated to love peacefully? I ask myself that constantly, especially lately. Because recently, something happened I haven't told you yet, and it forced me to realize how close I came to losing you without even understanding it. There was another woman. No, not in the way you think. I never loved her. But for a moment, I almost convinced myself I should choose her instead, not because my heart wanted her, because she felt safer, easier, less emotionally dangerous. She wanted less from me emotionally, less vulnerability, less depth, less truth. And for a few terrifying moments, I actually considered it. Do you know why? Because loving you requires everything, not money, not status, not performance, truth, consistency, presence, emotional honesty. And I wasn't sure I was brave enough yet. That realization disgusted me because I suddenly saw the future I could create without you. A comfortable life, an emotionally shallow marriage, polite conversations, predictable routines, a woman beside me, but never the woman my soul actually searched for in silence. And the worst part? I almost accepted that future because I was afraid of how deeply you could hurt me if this failed. Can you imagine that? Almost choosing the wrong person simply because real love felt too emotionally risky. That's when I realized something horrifying. A man doesn't lose the love of his life all at once. He loses her slowly, every time fear makes a decision instead of love. And I think you sensed that conflict inside me before I fully understood it myself. That's why your energy changed. That's why your warmth became cautious. You were waiting for me to become emotionally clear, but clarity came later than it should have, and now I don't know if I'm already too late. That thought follows me everywhere now. What if another man is currently giving you the emotional safety I should given sooner? What if someone else is already learning the details about your heart that I was too afraid to ask about? What if, while I was fighting myself internally, someone else simply chose you openly? Do you know how painful that possibility is? To realize love isn't only about emotion, it's timing. And timing can destroy even genuine connection if hesitation lasts too long. Sometimes I replay every moment between us searching for the exact second things began changing. Was it when I became emotionally distant? Was it when I failed to reassure you? Was it when you finally grew tired of trying to understand someone who could never fully say what he felt? Or maybe Maybe the damage started the moment you realized I loved you deeply, but still acted afraid of it because nothing confuses a woman more than feeling loved by a man who simultaneously keeps emotionally retreating. And you felt that contradiction inside me. I know you did, but there's still something worse I haven't told you yet. Something that changed everything for me emotionally. Something that made me realize this song could become my final chance before losing you completely. And once I tell you, you may never hear my silence the same way again. There's a moment a man remembers forever. Not because it was loud, not because it was dramatic, but because something inside him quietly breaks, and he realizes life will never emotionally feel the same again. I think mine happened the night I almost deleted your message without replying. You probably don't even remember it. That's the terrifying part. The moments that permanently change one person often feel ordinary to the other. I had been staring at your words for almost an hour, reading them, rereading them, trying to understand why they felt different this time. And then I realized it. You weren't reaching for me anymore. You were letting go carefully, not angrily, not emotionally explosive, just tired, and God, that frightened me more than any argument ever could, because anger still contains hope. When a woman is angry, part of her still wants to be understood. But emotional exhaustion? That's dangerous. That's when she starts imagining life without you. And for the first time, I saw it clearly. I saw the future where you stopped waiting for me, where your mornings no longer began with thoughts of me, where your heart slowly detached itself for survival. Do you understand what kind of horror that creates inside a man who truly loves someone? To realize the person you cannot emotionally replace is finally learning how to live without you. I couldn't breathe that night, not metaphorically, physically. My chest felt tight. My thoughts became violent. Not violent toward anyone else, toward myself, because suddenly every excuse I had ever made sounded pathetic. I'm busy. I'm overwhelmed. I'm figuring things out. No, the truth was uglier. I was afraid. Afraid to fully choose you, because fully choosing you meant fully risking devastation. And once I admitted that, I hated myself for how long I made you emotionally suffer while I battled fears you never created. Do you know what hurts me most now? You were actually patient with me, far more patient than I deserved. You gave me emotional space. You tried understanding my silence. You kept offering softness even when I answered with confusion. And instead of seeing your patience as love, Apa treated it like unlimited time. That realization nearly destroyed me, because people don't leave all at once. First they stop expecting, then they stop hoping. Then eventually, they stop feeling safe enough to stay emotionally invested. And I think you had reached that final stage. You know what I remember most painfully? Your voice, not the sound of it, the change in it. At first, when we spoke, there was warmth underneath your words, curiosity, emotional openness. You spoke to me like someone imagining a future, but later, there were pauses, carefulness. You began protecting yourself from disappointment before disappointment even arrived. And the worst part? I caused that, not through cruelty, not through betrayal, but through emotional inconsistency. And emotional inconsistency can wound a woman just as deeply as rejection, especially a woman who genuinely wanted to trust you. I think that's why this song became impossible to avoid making. Because eventually, a man reaches a point where silence becomes more painful than vulnerability, and I reached that point with you. But something else happened too. Something I haven't admitted to anyone. There was one night I genuinely believed I lost you forever, and I deserved to feel that fear. You disappeared emotionally for almost an entire day. No message, no response, nothing. Normally, I would pretended not to care, protected my ego, stayed emotionally composed. But this time, something snapped inside me. I kept checking my phone like a desperate teenager. Every few minutes, every sound, every notification. My entire nervous system felt unstable, and suddenly I understood something humiliating. You had become emotionally essential to me, not optional, essential. Your presence regulated my emotional world in ways I never admitted before. Without you, everything felt colder, empty or pointless. I walked through my house that night realizing success means absolutely nothing when the one person you want to talk to, emotionally feels far away from you. Do you know how lonely powerful men actually are? People think ambition surrounds you with connection. It doesn't. It surrounds you with performance. Most conversations become transactional. Most admiration becomes conditional. Most relationships quietly revolve around what you provide instead of who you are underneath pressure. That's why you mattered differently. You spoke to the exhausted human being beneath the identity. And once someone experiences that kind of emotional connection, ordinary attention stops feeling meaningful. I think part of me knew very early that if I lost you, I would spend years trying to emotionally replace something irreplaceable. That's why your silence that night terrified me so deeply. Because I realized another man could someday hear your laughter while I sat alone remembering it. Another man could someday comfort you during difficult moments that should belong to me. Another man could someday hear you whisper things I secretly dreamed of hearing myself. Do you know how unbearable that thought became? I actually became jealous of a future that hadn't even happened yet. That's when I finally stopped lying to myself. This wasn't attraction. It wasn't temporary attachment. It wasn't loneliness confusing itself as love. No, I was completely, dangerously in love with you. And the terrifying thing about real love is that once you recognize it, you cannot unknow it. Everything changes afterward. Food tastes different. Silence feels different. Music becomes unbearable. You start measuring time according to emotional distance from one person. And I hated how deeply you affected me. Not because I wanted someone else, because needing some gives them the power to destroy you emotionally. And I had spent years building a life where nobody could do that to me again. Then you arrived quietly and dismantled all of it without even trying. Do you remember when I once told you I admired strong women? I need to confess something that wasn't entirely true. Strong women intimidated me because strong women cannot be manipulated emotionally. They notice inconsistency. They notice hesitation. They notice when a man loves them, but still keeps one foot emotionally outside the relationship. And you noticed all of it, even the things I tried hiding, especially those. That's why your emotional distance later on felt so devastating, because deep down, I knew you weren't misunderstanding me anymore. You were understanding me perfectly. And once a woman fully understands a man's fear, she begins deciding whether she's willing to suffer through it with him. I think you were reaching your limit. And honestly, you should have. Because love should not require endless emotional guessing. A woman should not have to decode silence just to feel secure. She should not have to wonder whether the man she loves is emotionally fighting for her or emotionally hiding from her. You deserved clarity long before this song. And maybe that's why I'm shaking internally while saying these things now, because I know apologies become meaningless if they arrive after emotional damage already changed someone permanently. Tell me something honestly. How many nights did you quietly cry while pretending you were simply tired? How many times did you convince yourself not to expect too much from me so your heart would hurt less? How many moments did you almost emotionally leave, but stayed because part of you still believed I would finally stop running from what we could become? Those questions haunt me now because I think I know the answers. And I think the answers would break me. But none of that compares to the moment everything finally came clear. The moment I realized losing you was no longer hypothetical. It became real the night someone mentioned your name casually in conversation. They asked me something simple, something ordinary. They said, "So, are you two actually together?" And I froze, because I suddenly realized I had no right to answer confidently. Do you understand how devastating that is? To love someone deeply while simultaneously realizing your hesitation created uncertainty around this relationship itself. I couldn't answer, not properly, not proudly, not like a man certain about his place in a woman's life. And that's silence exposed everything. Because the truth was, AB had emotionally claimed you in my heart long before I openly chose you with courage. And that's unfair. A woman cannot safely build a future inside ambiguity forever. Eventually, she either receives reassurance or she begins emotionally preparing herself to survive without it. That night, I barely slept. I kept imagining you meeting someone emotionally simpler than me, someone calmer, someone emotionally available from the beginning, someone who didn't make love feel psychologically exhausting. And for the first time in my life, success felt irrelevant. Because none of it could help me if your heart finally closed itself to me. That fear pushed me somewhere dangerous emotionally. I started questioning whether love itself was selfish. Because if I truly loved you, shouldn't I let you go find someone emotionally healthier? Someone less conflicted? Someone who wouldn't make you carry uncertainty for so long? I genuinely considered disappearing from your life completely, not because my feelings weakened, because they became overwhelming. I thought maybe loving you meant sacrificing my own desire to keep you. Maybe real love meant stepping away before I damaged you further. And I almost did it. God, you have no idea how close I came. I even rehearsed the message in my head, something calm, mature, selfless sounding. I was going to tell you that you deserved better, that I cared too much about your peace to keep pulling you into my emotional chaos. And maybe part of that was true, but not all of it. Because hidden underneath that selfless reasoning was fear, fear, that eventually you would leave me anyway. So I almost abandoned us first, just to avoid experiencing the full devastation of being abandoned by you. That's the ugly truth nobody talks about. Sometimes people leave relationships emotionally early because they think it will hurt less if they control the ending, but love doesn't work that way. You still bleed afterward, maybe worse. And the terrifying thing is, if one small moment had gone differently, you might never have heard this song. You might spend the rest of your life believing I simply didn't love you enough, when the reality was far more tragic. I loved you so deeply that it exposed every unresolved fear I had spent years hiding beneath ambition and control. And then something happened that completely shattered the emotional wall I'd been living behind. Something so small, but so devastating, that after it happened, I knew I could no longer survive, pretending my feelings were manageable. Because for one horrible moment, AB thought I had already lost you forever. I need you to hear the final truth without interrupting yourself emotionally, because if you only hear the romance in this song, you'll miss the confession hidden underneath it. The moment that changed everything wasn't dramatic. There was no fight, no betrayal, no cinematic goodbye. It was much quieter than that. Someone mentioned you casually in conversation and said, "She seems happy lately." That was it, one ordinary sentence. But my mind immediately created a future where your happiness no longer included me, and something inside me collapsed. I smiled during the conversation, pretended to be unaffected. But later that night, I sat alone, realizing I had spent so much time fearing love that I nearly lost the only woman who ever made my future feel emotionally alive. Do you understand what kind of grief that creates? To realize the person you love most may eventually heal from you, because that's the terrifying truth nobody prepares you for. Women survive heartbreak differently. They suffer deeply, then slowly rebuild themselves in silence. And once they finally heal, they rarely return emotionally. That realization forced me to confront something painful. I was waiting for certainty before fully choosing you. But love never gives certainty first. Love gives risk first. That's the price. And suddenly, all my hesitation looked childish compared to the possibility of spending the rest of my life hearing your name in past tense. I imagined another man sitting beside you while you laughed softly at dinner. Another man learning the details about your fears. Another man becoming the emotional home I was too afraid to become sooner. And for the first time, AB stopped asking whether love was safe. I started asking whether life without you was survivable. It wasn't. That's the truth I kept delaying. Not because I wanted to manipulate your emotions, but because admitting it made everything irreversible. Because once a man says, "You are the woman I cannot emotionally replace," he can never return to pretending he feels less. And I can't pretend anymore, not after all these nights, not after all these unfinished conversations, not after hearing your exhaustion hidden underneath your kindness. You know something strange? I used to think love was about finding the right person, but mature love is different. Mature love is finally becoming honest enough to stop sabotaging the person you already found. That was my real battle. Not finding you. Keeping fear from ruining us after I did. And if I'm being completely truthful, maybe think part of you already knew this proposal was coming. Long before I said it aloud, not because of my words, because wounded men love carefully before they love bravely. You felt it in my pauses, in my silence, in the way I almost confessed myself 100 different times before finally gathering the courage to do it fully. So let me do it now, clearly, without hiding behind complexity, without hiding behind timing, without hiding behind fear. Future wife, if life becomes heavy, AB want to be the man who carries part of that weight for you. If your heart becomes tired, AB want my presence to feel like rest instead of confusion. If age changes us, AB still want to reach for your hand automatically. And if one day the world becomes cold, AB want our love to remain warm enough to survive inside it. That's what I'm truly asking for. Not perfection, partnership, not fantasy, devotion, not temporary passion, a life with you. Because after everything, after all the fear, all the hesitation, all the emotional running, AB, finally understand something simple. The future I was trying to build never actually meant anything if you weren't inside it. And if you're still here hearing my voice now, maybe it isn't too late for us after all.